A small Cambridge inn called the White Horse. The Reformation came.
Restless is raw, unscripted, reformed radio.
Welcome back to Restless, everybody. It is so good to be back with you. This is Pastor Michael, and once again, unfortunately, the honorable host of the podcast, Matt, is not with us, but we, Lord willing, are coming toward the end of that. You'll have to put up with just me and whatever guest I can pull in to talk about things I want to talk about. But you do get that benefit of having people that maybe would not have been on otherwise. And so I hope you've been enjoying some of the episodes coming out. Today, I am joined by somebody that I actually get to talk to somewhat regularly, and I will let him introduce himself. But we are being joined by one Daniel Rohde. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Is this your first time? This is your first time doing this, right?
It is. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Well,
Daniel, why don't you share with everybody who you are? I mean, obviously I know you, but share with everybody kind of who you are, how maybe you got connected to the show.
Yeah. So I'm a dad, wife to Reagan.
A wife here.
Wow, this is starting out well. Yeah, husband to Reagan. I grew up around.
You've got just these different ideas on the mind we're going to be talking about, and it's messing with your family life.
Yep. But I grew up around the church that Michael's your pastor at here. I've been also attending seminary lately, which maybe kind of brings us into the sort of the topic for today. But I guess in terms of work life, so I work as an engineer, and then I'm a seminary student as well. I'm under care with the Wisconsin Presbytery, which has been good. So I've been at seminary for about a year now, and pursuing ministry. So, which is good.
Awesome. Yep. So Daniel is somebody who's at our church that I regularly get to talk to. Sometimes fishing, sometimes just walking around a lake. Which is pretty sick. It's pretty awesome, actually. But Daniel was texting me recently about some things that he was reading, and I thought, when I realized I needed to have somebody on the Restless podcast, I was like, I bet Daniel would be a fun conversation, a good conversation partner to talk about some of the things he was texting me about. And so, Daniel, I'm going to let you bring up the topic,
Sure.
and why exactly this was on your mind. And then we can start digging in a little bit.
Yeah. So I guess one of the fun things about seminary is just getting to get a pretty broad breadth of reading done. I've had an interest in theology for a long time, but there's a lot of, particularly like the older writers that to be exposed to that I hadn't been before. And so in one of our classes, we been going over a lot of the early church fathers, the patristics, getting kind of reading different works of theirs, and sometimes they're just excerpts from them. And one of our sections we were reading particularly on kind of some of the monastics and ascetics in the early church. And so particularly what we read were like the Cappadocian fathers. And primarily there's three primary ones when they're referred to like that. It would be Basil the Great. He has a younger brother, Gregory of Nyssa, and then Gregory of Nazianzus, or however you pronounce it, Nazianzus.
I always say Nazianzus, but
Nazianzus. I think that's right.
That I'm right.
No, you're probably right. Which would be kind of like 4th century, like 300 to 480 writers. And they seem to be some of the first ones to really have a lot of writing in sort of this monastic ascetic vein of things in terms of the sort of renouncement of the world, demeanor. with relation to Christianity, particularly at least. They're pretty well known for being defenders of Trinitarian theology, particularly. So they're pretty well known for that, as being giants in the faith for that.
If you want to read early church work on the Trinity, they really are the go-to and do phenomenal work.
Yeah. We read something by Nazianzus on the Trinity, and that was really good. And they were kind of helped with the Nicaea, some of that, a little bit more afterwards, even some of the formulation that we probably use in most churches today. They were kind of key in doing some of that. But one of the struggles and kind of the fun things, I suppose, in reading them is kind of getting exposure, I suppose, to just the ways that they think and even how they talk. It has its own challenges, and it challenges maybe a lot of your, assumptions about the Bible, about God, about, living. Partly because sometimes just how they say things and the vocabulary that they use, even in the translations that we get, they definitely seem to have a broader use of language sometimes than we would probably appreciate in certain aspects, which gets into even just the difficulty of maybe asserting certain things that they are saying and maybe intending by what they're saying. But anyways, these guys are pretty much giants in the faith, and they're people you would typically want to respect when you come and read and take them seriously.
Absolutely. It's if you haven't read much of the early church, I know sometimes, especially today, online Catholic or Orthodox apologists will be like, if you read the Church Fathers, you instantly become Roman Catholic, or you instantly become
right.
Orthodox, and just go read them because it's not true. I've spent more time reading the Church Fathers than any reformer personally. I don't know if that's normal in Presbyterian circles, but it's just the case. I love reading the early Church Fathers. And what you find is there are significant differences in how we say things. One of the things you said that was interesting there is even thinking about how we're reading backwards, right? They're at the very beginning as various doctrines are being formulated, as the way that we use theological language is becoming more precise over time.
Right.
And so they're at the beginning end of that. We're here on a much further end, especially with the later creeds and then the confessions that have come, and the way that we use language to talk about God, to talk about the faith, has become more specific over time. And it's going to be a little different depending on the Christian tradition you're in. But we do use language in a more precise way, probably. And so it is interesting to think about that as one way that is both difficult in reading the Fathers, but also can be really helpful to us in some ways, because they're conversation partners that do, literally, but also metaphorically speak a different language.
Right.
And so it can help to kind of broaden your understanding a little bit.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. I do think that, I think one of the fun things about reading them particularly is that, is actually the unity that we often have with a lot of them. It's kind of fun to see early church fathers saying things that would be, really common and orthodox today to say and think, and you can kind of cut through a lot of bias from time, I suppose, and they're saying the same things in a lot of cases.
Right.
So that can be really comforting and fun to see as well in its own respect.
Right.
But one of the works that kind of prompted some of this discussion was we were reading Basil on his ascetical works. And he has a discourse, an exhortation on the renunciation of the world and spiritual perfection. We read this one in another work, which I think the other one, which I think we'll probably get to in our Patreon episode. Got to follow for that a little more probably. They sort of got my fur up a little bit because in some of the respects, it could be partly how they're saying things, but they did get my fur up a little bit in terms of I didn't really agree, or I felt that they were not defending their assertions as well as I would have liked to see in terms of probably just because I disagreed, it felt like it was off the cuff and vague, or they're making claims about what is good that at very least in our context, in our time, I would not normally appreciate that kind of view, probably.
Yeah.
And so, again, with the respect of these men, there's sort of it should cause you to pause a little bit and try to evaluate whether that's you or them. That's in error there, or
Right.
especially.
And I do, by the way, I have no thought of, man, the fathers were, somehow, these perfect men or anything like that. I don't feel the need to do that at all. I don't feel the need to feel that way at all. I don't need to pretend that there's something that they weren't, because my tradition doesn't need me to do that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take them very seriously. And even to the point where my tendency is to say, well, they're right until I'm absolutely positive that they're wrong. That's where I start almost every time. Yep. They're probably, if I come to something where I find it really difficult to agree, I'm going to lean in their direction unless I have good reason not to. And maybe that's wrong, by the way, because there is sometimes this sense that simply because something is ancient, therefore it is better. It has more truth or something like that.
Yeah.
Even thinking about, because they're closer to the advent of the New Testament church, therefore they're closer to the truth in some way, which actually just isn't even true, right? I mean, we actually have greater access to even the writings of their contemporaries than they did, right? And so we have actually in many ways much greater view when it comes to things like what else was being written at the time, how were they understanding things, how are they applying the apostles' teaching, et cetera, et cetera. So that's probably not right, but that is how I feel.
Yeah.
I do feel it's ancient, it must be better, even though that's not always the case.
Yep. But either way, it at least gives you some good things to chew on. You at least can take some humility in reading it. And it is sometimes hard to read and understand all the nuances of what they're getting at, which I guess is partly what I'm getting at. But in his introduction, though, so I guess reading this ascetical work, he's aiming at encouraging and advocating for a life of virtue in everything, like a striving after perfection, and even maybe sort of in a sort of Greek way, they're trying to define the perfection, what the optimal life looks like, what pure virtue would be, which I think is a noble task, and I think that's actually something probably needed more in our day than not. I think we probably are way too casual in our expectations of what following Christ looks like, what grace really, what the fruits of that should be, what that would look like if it were to take root and bear lots of fruit. I think we probably undervalue that a lot. So he's certainly trying to encourage that. I was going to read this one little section in his introduction. It kind of looks at that. He says, "Come to me, all you that labor and are burdened, and I will refresh you," says the divine voice, signifying either earthly or heavenly refreshment. In either case, he calls us to himself, inviting us, on the one hand, to cast off the burden of riches by distributing to the poor, and on the other, to make haste to embrace the cross-bearing life of the monks by ridding ourselves through confession and good works of the loads of sin contracted by our use of worldly goods. So that's kind of his opening to this, and that's what he's striving for, particularly that obeying God's call to follow him, to take up our cross, particularly. But I think one of the things that this opening maybe highlights is I suppose maybe the struggle that I had with it kind of throughout, off and on. There were lots of really great things, but one of the difficulties was just his language of ridding ourselves, particularly of sin overall, but his means being through confession, good works, and then even his his comments about the load of sins being contracted by our use of worldly goods. And you'll see this kind of play out a little bit. And in terms of just the monastics in general, there's kind of a vow of renouncing of worldly goods, so of riches. There would be chastity. Often it'd be kind of a renouncement of even like familial relationships in general, just kind of a separation from all sorts of any sort of tangible worldly connection. There's pretty much a minimizing of all of that so that you can seek after the heavenly life, that you can pursue sort of like the spiritual life as much as possible. At least that's how they seem to see it, right, and to think about it. And I think that just that principle in general, as it plays out, I think I wrestled with in terms of how valuable that attitude of like the contact with the world, the worldly goods, depending on how you define that, because that could be defined in a way that would make it obviously true. If you define worldly goods as intrinsically just the sinful aspects of the world, if that's how he's defining it, that would make more sense.
But they're not.
Not completely, no.
Right. They definitely don't.
Yep. They definitely go a lot further than that kind of reading of it, I think.
Yeah.
So
you think about some of the like the very early monastics, that like the Desert Fathers, they're doing things like, go out into the desert in the middle of nowhere, locking themselves in caves where people have to bring them just the right amount of food to live.
Right.
And food and water to live, and that's it, right? Like, and then it's like everything else is just devote every other moment to prayer, spiritual warfare, etc. And so that is like that does play into this whole idea. This kind of asceticism is seen as like, this is the way that you pursue true virtue, perfection in this life, is by shedding yourself of all of these worldly goods, not even just sinful goods, but like just the actual physical goods of life.
Yep. Yeah. And it's like one of the things that reading him was interesting because he seemed to view that kind of life as being necessary, because it was actually this is why I find it strange too, is that it was easier. And he argues that like, if you couldn't, be holy or pursue, virtue to its highest end, without these distractions of life, without these, just distractions, I suppose. How would you ever do it with all of those things present? Like, you stay in the world and you still have them, like you still have a family and you still enjoy food. Like, how could you ever pursue that? And I just think that that assertion about just the nature of the world it's a pretty important question to figure out for people in terms of like how they should think about whether their goods or life in the world, how it does or doesn't serve them, and how much they are or are not captured by it versus using it to serve and glorify God in their life. Because they definitely seem to have and this is one of the assertions I feel like they don't defend very well, is just this outright assumption that it's better and more holy and not even necessary to renounce anything that's like pleasurable, that like almost pleasure itself is a stain. It's a fleshly thing that is not at all in line with like divine life or pursuit of God in any way. It's always a distraction. It's never like an aid to your appreciation and love of God. It is like it's like a diversion. Like, if you think of all the attention that you could give to anything or to God or something, it trickles off. It diverts your attention. It diverts your energy. Right. And so they're trying to focus it all into one place. And it starts to feel very like strange in some respects, because there's definitely aspects of what they end up starting to advocate for within like as monks, like what should your practices be, that I found very helpful actually, and very like there's a lot of good things that you could take out of that and apply. But it is hard to kind of strain those things out and balance them. Yeah.
I'd be interested to talk to a friend of the show, Dr. Matt Hoskins, about this. He's our show's patristics expert who's come on in the past. I don't know if he still does, but was teaching some with Davenant on patristics. But super interesting thing to think about because of how different it is. But also, I would argue that some of this is kind of on the return in some ways, asceticism anyway. So it does seem to me this is purely, I'm no expert in this, right? I can't claim to be an expert, but I see the same thing. And I love, for instance, Basil. I read his, the little book that St. Vladimir's puts out of the patristic paperbacks. They have one of his writings on feasting and fasting.
Okay.
Or fasting and feasting. I don't know. It's one of the ways. It's those two things. And it's a great little book. And he actually did help me to see elements of the importance and the good of fasting that I had never quite understood. I still have this desire at some point to kind of work through fasting and exactly what its place is supposed to be in the Christian life, because I feel much more, I feel like I understand it more now, in part from reading Basil, but I still don't feel I just don't feel good about like, how are we supposed to think about it?
Mm-hmm.
But they have such a strong view of the importance of fasting in life that actually Basil says this is something that was going on actually before sin even. And I actually do think he's kind of right. But in God's prohibition of Adam and Eve eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he says somewhere in his writings that this is a kind of fasting, that they were actually being taught to learn how to fast even before sin. And so has this idea that there is actually a place for something like fasting, even apart from being in a sinful world, that there is something good simply in abstaining from something for a time in order, and this is maybe me adding my own thoughts to it. Maybe he didn't say this, but I think he did. But in order to prepare yourself to then have a greater enjoyment of something later. So it is the putting off for a time of something that may be good for greater joy, greater enjoyment at a later time. My way of saying it has become saying that fasting is a means to an end, and the end is feasting, right? Fasting is to prepare you for that. But when you think about the early church, kind of the first several hundred years of the church coming out of a wildly pagan culture, this is something that it's hard for us to even get our minds around, just how truly dark the world was before Christ. You do have some light. You have the law of God. You have Israel. You have some of these things, but it's just true that the ancient world was a radically different place. Before Christ died and rose from the dead and ascended on high, the world was very dark. And as the gospel is going out in the ancient world, you have Christians living in these pagan cultures that I really just think most of us couldn't even imagine, right? You think about, it's hard. Again, we read past these things in the New Testament, but think about how often things in the New Testament will just refer to just temple prostitutes and, how you need to be careful not to go and sleep with the temple prostitutes. That's like a common, for, 1 Corinthians, this is a common thing that you have to warn people in the church about. Not to say that there's no sexual sin in the church today, but it's not just a very normal thing that you would expect. People are going to every day be walking by the temples with the prostitutes outside,
Mhm.
calling them to come in, that they're used to doing, by the way. They're used to doing that probably most of their life. And then all of a sudden, they hear about Christ. They want to follow him. And now it's like, oh, you're actually not supposed to do that, right? Like that's a different world than we live in. I've been
Mhm.
talking with some people about it with the Odyssey coming out. And if you go and read the Odyssey, you realize just how, I mean, we kind of, again, imprint our own modern moral reasoning onto a story like the Odyssey. But you have in the Odyssey things like, Odysseus is trying to reach home, but also he like stops by and he'll like sleep with one of the gods for a while on his way.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, and she's trying to trick him, but it's not seen as like, oh, what a bad husband, or what, like he's doing something deeply wrong, or anything like that. It's just what happens, right? The kind of bloodshed and violence that happens in a lot of these ancient works, it's nothing like what we would ever be comfortable with. And so you take a world that is built on this kind of absolute giving in to your impulses, like built around it. Not just you could fall into this, but it is at the core, right? Fundamental religious practice involves things like that have to be warned about in the New Testament, like orgies.
Sure.
Right? Like the Apostle Paul has to warn people, hey, don't be doing that anymore.
Yep.
Right. And these just absolute like drunken, debaucherous feasts to the gods and things like that. So that's the world, right? That these guys are coming out of, looking to follow Christ. Now, it wasn't all like that. There was an asceticism that actually we can read about in the New Testament too. But a lot of that, it seems anyway, in part was reactions against some of these things. It was through the twistings of Christ. It was through different kind of, Jewish Gnosticism that would sometimes come with these ascetic tendencies. And so it's not to say that there was never any asceticism in the early days, but it does seem to me that it at least makes sense. What this is, again, maybe my non-expert reasoning, it makes sense to me that you're coming out of that kind of a world. You would be driven in the direction of, okay, we got to stop all of it, right?
Yep.
Like it's so out of control. We need to just put an end to all of these things that we're doing. If you ever, by the way, this is how I think about it, and again, could be wrong, but if you've known anybody who, for instance, grew up in an alcoholic's home, usually, not always, but usually they're like, it is wrong to ever even touch alcohol, right? Like, period.
Right.
Now that's not true, right? Like it isn't. But that is their experience. Like their experience is like that is always wrong. And so what they do is they jump the other way. There's this kind of big reaction against it. And actually, I think this happened in the ancient world too, by the way. Within the pagan world, you definitely see that kind of back and forward kind of swing of those sorts of things, right? You have the stoicism in the midst of the kind of absolute debauchery. And so it's not to say that it's all of one kind, but it does seem like you're being formed in that kind of a world. The natural response in many ways is going to be, oh, we have to like remove any possibility of interacting with any of these things because it just takes hold of you.
We're
completely.
too weak. We're too weak.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I basically see it as that is what you have to do when you're immature. Right. And I don't want to say these guys are immature because they're greater men than I ever will be. Right. I don't mean in an absolute spiritual sense.
Sure.
I just mean culturally, right? There's something different when you have, thousands of years of Christian culture and Christian families forming things around you to where now you and I, the way that we look at the world and interact with the world, the way we see things is going to be different than, hey, I'm the first or maybe the second Christian in my family line. And like the people I grow up with, like, yeah, they're all going to the temple prostitutes, or they're engaging in these idolatrous feasts and they're whatever. It's just so all over the place. It would make sense. You feel the need to go far the other direction.
Yeah. Which I suppose, maybe makes sense a little bit why we, I think we do see some of that swing in that direction. Not all of which is probably bad. Like, I think there's probably a good chunk of it that is actually, like you're saying, healthy. Well, at least I think you're saying is healthy in terms of like when you are weak in terms of like your inability, like your lack of self-control, that you would actually do something extreme like that, almost as a healing process even. And that would likely often be helpful and good, that you would take on some of those rules for at least for a time, at least. Yeah, I think it just is interesting in terms of the extremes that they do go to, like like being picky about the beds that they sleep on, that they don't taste good food, they don't wear anything good, it is hard to like wrap my mind around that that mentality in terms of it just, I don't know, it just seems to like reject all that like God created as good. Like, I don't know how they thought about that, but I think you're probably right in terms of the the lack of, just like that culturally wanting to withdraw from it as much as possible to like reset, both yourself and others in a way that would be devoted to Christ. And I was thinking too, in terms of like, if you do believe in God using means to bless you, that hearing God's word, that reading it, no matter how you feel about it, maybe in that moment or in that time, offering prayers, meditation, that kind of thing, which I think are good things. If you really believe that those can be means that God uses to strengthen you, to mature you, to ground you in various ways, and contentment and love, there is sort of that proposition that is compelling in some cases, that why would you not just strive to do that as much as possible? And I don't think that ultimately, I don't know that it works that mechanistically. I don't think it's a wrong thing in principle. I do struggle with like, it's sort of that seems to be their logic at some level, is that these are the good things that we know are the good things. We're going to do as much as of these ones as possible, right. Which seems to be again, we kind of mentioned as a swing in the other direction, but it seems to almost be it's almost like a mechanistic view of God and righteousness. And I think you do see this, come out in terms of merits, in terms of works righteousness, at least at some level, that there's an attainment of heaven by your virtue. And I think that can be a dangerous mentality, that like it does slip into the church in various ways today. And I think particularly people who are more inclined, like in terms of they are sincere and they're passionate about honoring God in their life and in all that they have. There's a tendency to hear those kinds of people and feel guilt and shame in a way that would lead you to imitate them, maybe unwisely at a certain level, that it would cause you almost a doubt of faith. And I think some of this aesthetic impulse, at least is what I've been thinking about it, is that it seems to be thought of almost as a way of filling up the cup, so much as a way that like if you think of Christ, he doesn't come down and act as a servant because he was lacking, right? Like he comes down already full, and he empties himself for our sake. But it was not because he needed to be filled up by going out into the wilderness because he lacked virtue.
Yes.
It was more of a proof of his love. It was a giving of his love. And I think so much of the ascetics seem to be much more self-focused. They're honestly, in a lot of aspects in terms of like what they prioritize, it does end up being pretty self-focused, it seems. And it seems to almost be, it looks like the same thing, but it's almost the complete opposite in its real effects in terms of it being, whereas Christ is coming for others, like it is coming to preserve themselves from everything, and they're just kind of avoiding it. And like if you think of how that would work out in in relationships or family, like it's sort of like the individual who gets on a really strict kick of something for some reason, which could be good sometimes, but they start to impose that kind of strictness on others, or at least try to, or rag on it. And I do think that if you've maybe in a good way, that you've reached contentment in something, or like you don't desire even reasonably good things, but you are okay with less, I think it would make more sense to me in terms of the pattern of Christ that would give you the opportunity to actually give more, like not just to like try to seek out less for other people too, like take away things from people, so much as a desire to give and to bless those more because you're content with less, so much as trying to bring people onto your level somehow through ascetical impulses.
Right.
I kind of said a lot there. I don't know if that made any sense, but
no, I think it makes sense. I think about C.H. Spurgeon has a quote somewhere in his lectures to my students where he basically says, hey, you can only allegorize scripture if you're really good at it. And so for instance, he's like John Bunyan could allegorize any part of scripture because he was the best at it. And he said, but if you're not good at it, you shouldn't do it. And when I first read that, I hated it. I was like, this is ridiculous. And as I get older, I'm like, he's kind of right. And I want to almost paraphrase that and say, yeah, like these guys could be ascetics because like they were good at it. And right. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they weren't. But there is something to like, okay, well, maybe they could do it, but it really can't be the normative practice. And that ultimately it comes to a level of balance, right? There actually does have to be balance in this life between the fasting and the feasting. Asceticism is a problem when it's not just done as a kind of practice to grow in discipline, but it truly becomes like I'm measuring my holiness against others, or I'm trying to earn something of my own holiness.
Yeah.
The problem is the New Testament is actually really clear that doesn't work, right? So Paul in Colossians 2, therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Let no one disqualify you insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. Now, admittedly, Paul's dealing with a very particular kind of asceticism, likely coming out of a kind of Jewish Gnosticism. But he still makes clear that idea of abstaining from something, that insisting on this abstinence from something is the means of attaining the substance, is wrong, because the substance is already here and the substance is Christ. And so the idea that you still have to live in a way where you're putting off those things is just it is wrong. It is not true. Now, the flip side of that is, as we've kind of at least alluded to, that anytime you're dealing with a culture of excess, there actually is, I think, a very noble impulse to move toward more of an ascetic tendency. Now, that can't be, hey, I'm going to do this because it's what makes me the good guy, right? If you want that, then just go read Marcus Aurelius and be done with it, right? Like that's not actually inherently Christian, right? The people that are like, well, if I just like discipline my body according to certain monastic practices, that makes me a good Christian. The problem with that is there's plenty of absolute pagans who did that forever. And so that's not enough, actually. The substance is Christ. And so the asceticism is not necessarily good, but learning discipline, right? And so this is where actually I do think fasting comes in, abstaining from certain things, especially when you're in a culture of absolute debauchery, which we are in, right?
Yep,
like we are there, absolutely. And there is a greater need for increased fasting, I think, not just from food, but from all kinds of things, but abstaining from things that are good things, right? So, I mean, food is a good thing. God gives it. Alcohol is a good thing. God gives it. There are all these things that are good, but it's actually good also to remove yourself from them, to not enjoy those good things for a time. If there is some need to grow in discipline, in wisdom, in discernment, in prayer, those can all be really important things to do then, if you want to grow in those ways. So Ecclesiastes is something I've been preaching through, and so it ties into this in a lot of different ways, interestingly. And so even if you want to think about this a little bit deeper, because we won't keep going that much longer, but go and read Ecclesiastes. What you'll find there is, I think, basically balance. A balance of, hey, the riches of this life literally cannot satisfy you, right? They cannot actually, all the food and drink and sex in the world cannot satisfy you, because that's actually not what it's supposed to do. And what we do is we go into those things thinking, oh, this is the feast, right? This is the, like, this is the thing about feasting, by the way. Go and read some Joseph Pieper, In Tune with the World, and meditate about the whole idea of feasting for a bit. Feasting is not possible with just a bunch of food and drink and like an extravagant spread. You can't actually force a feast just by having the right stuff. It can help kind of prepare the way. But you've been in positions where you've gone to a place where it's really extravagant, it's really nice, and it was just a bummer the whole time. And on the flip side, you've been with a couple of friends eating like a McDonald's burger and had the greatest time of your life, right? Like just enjoyed that moment to the nth degree. And that's because true feasting, true actually like lasting joy, those good, like truly good moments are only possible as the gift of God. And this is something that Ecclesiastes points to a lot, repeatedly actually, where it talks about how, hey, yeah, you'll never actually be satisfied in the things of this life. But the answer is not then, oh, I guess we should just not enjoy the things of this life. The answer is actually enjoy when you can, right? When God gives you the opportunity to enjoy, but you can only do that ultimately in Him. But it does say things like it's better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. That, in other words, if you're choosing between absolute, I'm going to throw myself into any of the good pleasures of this life, or I'm going to cut myself off and live in a cave. I think Ecclesiastes would say that the latter's better, actually. That is better to a certain extent. But that's not the right answer either. It would say there's actually a kind of balance in life that looks to God and takes all the toil and trouble along with the joy, the good things, the benefits of this life, and actually takes all of it as the gift of God, looking to Him in all of it. And that also just fits far more with a creational view of life, that God created us. He created everything. He created all of these physical things for us, right? And us for them. And like the idea that you're not supposed to enjoy the things of this life, it is radically contrary to the very fact of creation, right? It cannot be true, at least not to a very far degree. But it can be true that even in these things, we're always meant to look for something that is higher, that is greater. And so if you are completely, consumed by your consumption of the things of this life, then actually it would be okay for you to go sit in a cave for a while, right? It would be good for you to cut back, to fast. That's actually what you need, because you need to be able to understand, oh, that's not where like my wholeness, my fullness actually lies. I actually have to look for something from outside of this world to be filled in a deep and rich and spiritual sense. Whereas the ancient pagan world, as well as our society, says, right, be filled by all of this, right? Be filled by the debauchery, be filled by the excess, be filled by the consumption. And increasingly, people are finding out that just can't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good. I think if anything, the monastics and people like Basil can teach us is one is that we can probably strive harder than we do in terms of the fasting side, in terms of that we are too quickly overwhelmed maybe by going without a meal or being quiet and praying. And I think there's a lot to be learned there, that, almost dialing up both sides of that. And like you were saying, in terms of the fasting also as the feasting, and less of the middle squish, where I think we often find ourselves as the consumer, and never as like the in fasting or feasting. I think we probably are poor in both of those a lot of the time. And but it is important to remember that both are actually a good thing, and I think point us to heaven in both cases. I mean, just in different dimensions, for sure.
It's good. Well, we're actually going to keep talking about some of these things behind the Patreon wall. If you want to come and join us over there, we're going to be talking about the supposed virtue, or the virtue. I don't want to call it that. That sounds bad. But the virtue of virginity, and whether or not we should see virginity as particularly a virtue. So we're going to get into that and the fathers and some other things that are said there. Daniel, do you want to point anybody to where they could find you if they want to ask you questions about your thoughts on this?
Michael knows where to find me. I don't really have any.
I'll pass stuff along.
Any handoffs, other than maybe Twitter, but not really very active. So.
All right.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is fun.